It's officially cap cutting season throughout the NFL, and the first domino has fallen for the Seahawks. But in a positive way, we're going to be breaking it all down here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s for tuning in, whether you're in Sacramento, California, or you are down in Austin, Texas. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. It's officially cap cutting season across the NFL. The Seahawks jumping into the fray. More moves to come, but we're going to dive into the decision to restructure the big cat and what could come next for the Seahawks as we draw closer to the start of the new league year. We've got defensive report cards for the defensive tackles, Williams, Jared Reed, and company, plus Mike Holmgren up for Canton. Will he finally get to the finish line tonight at NFL Honors? We're going to take a look at his case for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. All this brought your way by Prize Picks. Download the app and use the code LOCKEDINNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It feels like we've had to wait a little bit more with anticipation because of the new offensive coordinator hiring, all the new staff hirings for the Seahawks, but the first shoe has dropped as Seattle looks to get cap compliant. Entered today more than $20 million in the red on the salary cap. That's not where you want to be, but a big chunk of that being fixed today by restructuring Leonard Williams, the big cat, 1 year after signing his 3-year contract worth $64.5 million. The Seahawks, Rob, saving a little over $14 million by restructuring his contract. Now, the trade-off, his cap goes up to $29 million next year, his hit, and he'll be worth more than 10% of Seattle's salary cap next year. They do have the ability to potentially do some reworking on that contract or extend him before next year to lower that cap hit. There's all these different mechanisms, but this is a positive first move for the Seahawks to get closer to being back to cap compliance. And we know that they eventually are going to need to open up more space so that they are able to make some moves in free agency, keeping their own players and trying to pursue outside free agents.
Yeah, and I think that it is a logical move for the Seahawks. As you say, Corbin, and we've talked about this so many times, Seattle finds themselves in a little bit of salary cap purgatory in some ways. And we have, I think rightfully focused in on players like Geno Smith, a quarterback, DK Metcalf, a wide receiver. But I love the fact that Seattle essentially saved $14 million or created $14 million in cap space by restructuring a deal on the player that was arguably the best player on the franchise a year ago. I mean, you consider the fact that that Leonard Williams led the NFL in sacks and tackles for loss from the interior defensive line position. He did so in his 10th NFL season. I think that it just shows that John Schneider and the Seahawks are going to prioritize the players that play their best. And so to me, this is the type of a move that makes an awful lot of sense when it comes to the salary cap. I think it also makes an awful lot of sense when it comes to the locker room in terms of just look, again, if you play at an exceptional level, then you are going to get taken care of. And then I think it also that sends a message that, again, that something that the Seahawks have done in the past. They did it with the tight end Noah Fant. They did it with Draymond Jones. They've done it with several players now. They made a big trade, and then they are trying to extend these players. Excuse me, I said Draymond Jones. I meant Uchenna Nwosu. Again, when you make a splashy move and the player comes in and immediately balls out, as those players did, as the safety Julian Love did, to be able to extend them just a year longer, I think that what that is basically saying to the rest of the team is that if you really can put all of your marbles basically on the table and you have a spectacular season, the Seahawks are going to take care of you. Again, I think that this is a fantastic first move really to Seattle's offseason when it comes to players rather than coaches. And again, I think that it very much bodes well for a defensive tackle group that we're going to be talking about very much in focus here in a couple of minutes, Corbin. And there is no question that Big Pat was the guy on the prowl in 2024. And clearly the Seahawks think that is going to be the way in the future as well.
Yeah, obviously there's no question about where number 99 fits into Seattle's plans the next couple of seasons minimum. He is one of the foundational pieces. And I love that you mentioned the Seahawks are taking care of him, because this isn't an extension. They did add 2 void years to the end of the deal. And it's interesting because John Schneider, when void deals really came into vogue during the COVID year, where a lot of teams were doing that because you had the lack of TV and lack of stadium revenue that these teams had to deal with, and it hurt the salary cap. So teams were trying to figure out ways to draw out money a little bit further. John Schneider was one of the GMs that was adamant, I'm not going to do that. And he was not somebody that liked to do restructured contracts very often. But that has changed these last couple years, and I'll tell you the big reason why it has, Rob. 2020, they might have had a salary cap crisis, so to speak. That has not been the case for the last 3 or 4 years. We have seen dramatic influxes of cash coming into the league with the new television deal from the last CBA, and that has made this salary cap just skyrocket the last 3 or 4 years. So John Schneider's looking towards the future saying, I expect this trend's going to continue. I'm more willing to kick a little bit more money down the road because the salary cap's going to keep going up, and so we can absorb these hits. And so he's been more willing to make moves like this. But I think it does send a positive message to the locker room, because what this does, you are giving Leonard Williams a much bigger signing bonus. That's what you're doing. You're converting the base salary into a signing bonus, and that means the money goes right to the player. So Leonard Williams doesn't have to wait till next year to get a lot of this cash. He can get a big chunk of that money as a signing bonus. And then the Seahawks kick some of that cap hit in the next couple of years, and then they add some of it to the void years, which further takes away the burden that it puts in the next couple of years for the salary cap. So I think this is a move that is a really smart one. I am not in favor of doing a ton of restructures because it does continue to add up in future seasons. But I do think in this case, you created $14 million. You know Leonard Williams is on your team, and a $29 million cap hit next year, I don't think it's a big deal for a player at this talent level. So I think this is a smart move. Now the question is going to be what's next. As I just said, I'm not a big proponent of doing a bunch of restructures. Maybe Seattle looks at another player like an Uchenna Nwosu or DK Metcalf. Even though he's in the last year of his deal, he's got void years at the end of his contract. So the Seahawks can restructure to those void years if they want. There are options, but it feels like now that this first boot has dropped, now we're going to see some of these cap casualties are going to be coming up here, especially with the Combine coming up in a few weeks and the Super Bowl coming up this weekend. I think we're drawing closer to where some of these really difficult decisions with players like Tyler Lockett, potentially Noah Fant, maybe Draymond Jones, those tough decisions are now going to be coming up for John Schneider in this front office as they try to figure out how to not just get in the positive in terms of salary cap, but give themselves a space to actually be able to operate when the new league year starts next month.
Yeah, and I appreciate the follow-up and kind of explaining that process a little bit more for our listeners here. And I don't want it to be misconstrued. I wasn't trying to suggest that this was an extension for Leonard Williams, but as you said, it essentially is kicking the can down the road for a year. But it also almost forces Seattle to keep in mind that Leonard Williams' salary cap is going to, or number is going to jump up to, as you said, $29.5 million next season. Sure, if he continues to play at this exceptional level, then he is deserving of that. It also puts forces Seattle to kind of keep in mind that maybe if he is not played quite to that level next year, then you do choose to extend his deal. It basically is just reinforcing that Leonard Williams is a huge priority for this club. And as you said, it basically takes the money that he was going to get if everything goes well, because he lives in the NFL, sometimes things change. And so money in the bank now is always better from a player perspective than what could be coming down the line in the future. And so, again, I think that there is an awful lot of NFL or awful lot of Seahawks players who are looking at the way that the Seahawks basically helped Leonard Williams get that money right now based on the massive season that he just had. And so that is just going to be that much more of a motivating factor for some of those other players that are potentially, deciding whether or not they want to take some type of a new deal from the Seahawks. You mentioned DK Metcalf and then Geno Smith and Noah Fant, Tyler Lockett, Draymond Jones. To me, those are the logical next steps for the Seahawks because they remain essentially still behind. I think there's only 3 or 4 other NFL teams out there who are in a worse spot than the Seahawks right now when it comes to the salary cap. So there is going to be future moves here. Again, those players that we talked about before, Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Noah Fant, Draymond Jones. To me, those are the 5 players that you really should be focusing in on to see where Seattle takes their salary cap in 2025.
And one other name I'm going to throw out there from a restructure standpoint, Roy Robertson Harris. If the Seahawks restructure him because he's got 2 years left in his contract and void years, those void years are going to make it that those cap hits you're really pushing less than $1.5 million each of the next 3 years. And then his cap hit would be under $2.5 million next year. And suddenly that looks affordable for a guy that is a quality rotational defensive lineman. So that would be one name I would keep an eye on potentially. The Seahawks could decide to do something if they want to keep him, but they don't want a $6.6 million cap hit like he currently is scheduled for in 2025. When we come back, we're going to shift our focus to the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2025 announcement that should be coming up very shortly in NFL honors. And there's one former Seahawk coach that is up for the opportunity to get into Canton. We're going to talk about Mike Holmgren's legacy and why this needs to be the year that he gets into Canton. We'll get to that up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get into the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's your icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Those of you that have followed me on social media, you've probably already seen this today, but those that haven't, we've got a brand new website for you covering all Seattle sports all the time. It's the Emerald City Spectrum. Make sure to check it out. We opened the site today, a soft launch. We've got our hard launch on the 20th of February, but you can check out a couple of Seahawk articles. We've also got a Seattle Mariners article from our good friend of Locked On Mariners, Ty Gonzalez. 3 articles already up today. Make sure to check it out. That's www.emeraldcityspectrum.com. Check out those articles. We're really excited about this new project covering the Seahawks and all the major pro and college teams in the Seattle region. Rob, tonight the focus shifting over to the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2025. Announcement's going to happen at NFL Honors, which always happens during the week leading up to the Super Bowl. And there is a big-time Seahawks flavor in tonight's voting process, with Mike Holmgren being one of 5 finalists in the coach, contributor, and seniors category. And they've changed some of the rules up now. You have to pick at least 1 candidate from that group, but you can have up to 3. But the way that things have been shifted in terms of having as many as 5 modern players make it, may make it a little trickier for Mike Holmgren to get in. But you and I've talked about this a number of times on this show, and I'm going to bang the table again here. Mike Holmgren should have been in 10 years ago. He absolutely has got to get in tonight.
No, I think that he will get in tonight, frankly. I think that the fact that, he won the Super Bowl, Super Bowl 31, obviously as a member of the Green Bay Packers. And he won that game over Bill Parcells, a Hall of Fame coach, of course, with the New England Patriots at that time. And that game was in New Orleans. The fact that this Super Bowl is, of course, going to be in New Orleans again. To me, there's just a kind of a poetic ending to all of this. I 100% agree with you, Corbin, and that Mike Holmgren should have been in the Hall of Fame a long, long time ago. And if you just look at the statistics, they bear these things out. Look, I mean, 50 games over 500 throughout his 17 seasons in the NFL as a head coach. He went to 3 different Super Bowls, 2 different franchises, of course, the Green Bay Packers and the Seattle Seahawks, who, obviously way back in the Lombardi days, the Green Bay Packers had a lot of success. But when you really look at the lack of success that the Packers had prior to Mike Holmgren going there as head coach, and then his ability to turn around that franchise, of course, then goes to Seattle, a team that had never gone to the Super Bowl, takes them to a Super Bowl as well, albeit in a loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers, another Hall of Fame head coach, Bill Cowher. That to me is what basically says it all. Is the fact that Mike Holmgren is one of 5 coaches, at least when he took the Seahawks to that Super Bowl in 2005 against the Steelers, he was one of 5 coaches that took 2 different franchises to Super Bowls, and that just doesn't happen. I mean, we see some of these coaches that basically are able to just latch on to an unbelievable quarterback, and then they go multiple times. But if you are forced to build a team from the ground up in 2 different locations that are not likely to lure very many free agents like Seattle and Green Bay, you look at the quarterbacks that he has success with. I mean, you're going all the way back to San Francisco 49ers and Joe Montana. It was Mike Holmgren who was the play caller, the offensive coordinator under George Seifert that helped Joe Montana win the 2 MVP awards. Steve Young was not a first-round selection in the NFL draft. Joe Montana was not a first-round selection in the NFL draft. Matt Hasselbeck, Brett Favre, none of them first-round quarterbacks. The fact that he had the success that he did with the caliber of talent and where he had his success, Mike Holmgren should have been in the Hall of Fame, as you said, a decade ago. I feel very confident that he will be tonight because, again, I think that it just matches up so well with everything that's going on. Again, with this Super Bowl being in New Orleans, the time is now for Mike Holmgren to be inducted in Canton.
You may not call him the godfather of the West Coast offense because obviously he came up under several really good coaches, but he took the West Coast offense to a new level with what he was able to do with Brett Favre in Green Bay, back-to-back Super Bowl appearances. They won one of those games. Goes to Seattle and runs that system again with Matt Hasselbeck. And I think one of the most underrated things about Mike Holmgren, obviously everybody links him to the quarterback play that he had as an offensive coordinator and as a head coach, whether it's Steve Young, whether it's Joe Montana, whether it's Brett Favre, Matt Hasselbeck. Heck, they even got some decent games out of John Kitna as a starting quarterback in Seattle and got to the playoffs his first year in 1999. You can look at that work with quarterbacks, but he also was outstanding at building run games. You remember what Sean Alexander looked like. Ricky Waters had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons before Sean Alexander replaced him, and then Alexander had 5 straight years, 1,000-plus yards, won an MVP when the Seahawks got to the Super Bowl in 2005. Those Green Bay teams could run the living daylights out of the football too. San Francisco could run the football. Every team that he had success with had a balanced approach with that West Coast offense. They ran the football well. They were physical in the trenches. You had receivers that could create after the catch. And, of course, you had the tough-minded quarterbacks. Maybe not the same mindset, but they were all tough as nails. And so, really, there was that blueprint that was there. And you look at some of the coaches that have got in recently. Look, Dick Vermeil did some amazing things. Bill Cowher had a really good coaching career. I think you could make really strong arguments. We made these arguments before both those guys even got into Canton. You can make arguments that Mike Holmgren's got the better resume in a lot of different ways. More wins. Obviously leading 2 different teams to the Super Bowl. That's something Bill Cowher certainly didn't do. Now, Vermeil did, but Cowher didn't do that. But Vermeil did have near as many wins, and his win percentage was not near as good. as what Mike Holmgren's was. Holmgren got to 3 conference championship games. He made another Super Bowl, a couple Super Bowls as an offensive coordinator, as you mentioned, San Francisco. To me, Mike Holmgren should have been in, as I said, 10 years ago. And I think tonight is the night that it finally gets done, that we see. And look, I think you could probably say this. I've had the chance to speak with Mike Holmgren a handful of times, especially during the draft. I know that you've worked with him on KJR. He's been with Ian Furness on a lot of his shows. He's a frequent visitor, frequent guest on KJR, and you and I both work quite a bit with that station. But I'm not going to sit here and say that I have a super close relationship with Mike Holmgren, but the times that I've talked to him, this guy bleeds football. He just loves talking X's and O's, and I've relished the few opportunities I've had to talk to him. And I know you have similar feelings about getting to know Mike Holmgren off the field and what he's done since his coaching career. That just makes it that much more that you want to root for this guy to finally get in to Canton, as he's deserved to be for a long time.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, I think that Mike Holmgren is a Hall of Fame coach. I think that he's an even better man. And that is going back to when I very first had an opportunity to speak to him in a Mobile regional airport about 25 years ago or so, when the Seahawks were one of the coaching staffs for the Senior Bowl. And Mike Holmgren, I've told this story before, basically he is the man that told me that, hey, the guy I should be talking to is Scott McCloughan, who at the time was kind of an up-and-coming front office executive for the Seahawks. Of course, who wound up becoming a multiple general manager in the NFL. Had a great deal of success in his own right. And so some of the conversations that I have been very fortunate to have on and off the air with Coach Mike Holmgren have been some of the absolute highlights of my professional football career. I just am amazed by just the lineage that he has followed and that he has helped create in the NFL when it comes to coaches, when it comes to players, when it comes to scouts. To me, again, he is absolutely a slam dunk for Canton, has been for an awful long time. And as I mentioned, to me, the coaching tree is just one more feather in the cap that I think that we have to just talk about here for a moment. As I said, I think that it would be almost poetic if Mike Holmgren were to basically on the precipice of the Super Bowl, the Andy Reid, a former Mike Holmgren protege, could possibly be winning the 3rd consecutive Super Bowl, something that's never happened. Everybody focuses on the quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. What about Andy Reid in that regard? The fact that Andy Reid basically was nobody. I mean, he got his very first NFL job working for Mike Holmgren. That you look at John Gruden, for example, same situation, working under Mike Holmgren, both Super Bowl winners, obviously. In the case of, and Andy Reid, obviously a multiple Super Bowl winner. Steve Mariucci, Ray Rhodes, Dick Duran. I mean, the long list of very successful NFL head coaches, including multiple Super Bowl winners from the Mike Holmgren tree, essentially kind of make this a slam dunk conversation in my mind. And one of the reasons why while I will be nervous for tonight's decision and announcement by the Pro Football Hall of Fame, having worked with the Pro Football Hall of Fame before, I do not personally have a vote, but I know several who do. And I do feel very confident that they are voters who recognize Mike Holmgren's contributions to the game, and that he will be wearing a yellow jacket in just a few more months.
Yeah, and hopefully we're going to get that announcement here after the show that Mike Holmgren is going to be in the Hall. As for who he's going up against, it's a 5-person class in terms of coach, contributors, senior finalists. Holmgren, along with Ralph Hay, who was the owner of the Canton Bulldogs. We're going way back in NFL history for that one. Maxie Bond, linebacker who played for the Eagles, the Rams, and the formerly Washington Redskins. Sterling Sharp, who I think could have potentially been a first ballot if not for a career-ending injury, had a shortened career, but when he played, big part of Green Bay's success, and who coached him at one point? Mike Holmgren. And then Jim Tyrer, the tackle from the Dallas Texans and Kansas City Chiefs, also played briefly for the Washington Redskins as well. I think that this class shapes up well for Mike Holmgren to get in as that minimum one. Maybe there's going to be multiples, but I think it's going to be tricky with the fact that this is a really good player class that is coming in for the modern finalists. A lot of really deserving players that can be elected into the Hall of Fame as part of this class. So hopefully Holmgren gets that minimum one spot tonight. we'll have to wait and see, but certainly has been deserving for a long time with one of the most sterling resumes out there of any NFL head coach. When we come back, we're going to continue our end of season report card. We are getting closer to the finish line. We're going to the trenches on defense with defensive tackles. How did the group perform? We'll be breaking it all down coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a bit more time for lifting weights and working out, even during the off season. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you most so you can do more of it. And BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist today and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, and thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Going into the 2024 season, expectations were quite lofty for the Seahawks defensive line group, particularly the tackle group, after bringing in Byron Murphy II with their first-round pick, extending Leonard Williams. Jaron Reed returns. Jonathan Hankins comes in and reunites with defensive coordinator Adin Durde. This was viewed as a strength. Then you go out and get Roy Robertson Harris midway through the season before the trade deadline to bolster the depth. Unlike some position groups that had really high expectations that maybe didn't meet those expectations, Rob, I think you can make a really strong case that the defensive tackle group was as good as any position group for the Seahawks this past season. And of course, it starts with the big cat. We mentioned the restructured contract, but the numbers he put up this year, 11 sacks, nearly got to his career high of 11 and a half that he had with the Giants a few years back, had 28 quarterback hits, a career high. Returned to interception, 92 yards for a touchdown. Get moving, big fella. He was rumbling and bumbling to get that interception returned to the end zone, nearly an entire football field length. And, of course, you can add in all the other things that he accomplished, 16 tackles for loss. He had a number of really nice plays in the run game. You name it, he was fantastic. Leonard Williams has to get an A. I don't give A-pluses normally, but if I would, Leonard Williams was probably going to be in that mix because he was that dominant this season.
Yeah, very well said. I thought that the defensive tackle position as a whole for the Seahawks played reasonably well. We had very high expectations, as you said. I wound up giving the group as a whole a B-. And that might surprise some people because that is not the most spectacular of grades, but it definitely was powered by the fact that I gave Leonard Williams an A. I don't know how you can make an argument for anything other than an A or an A+, as you just said, given how well that he played, that the fact that he was the focal point of every opposing blocking scheme, and yet still 11 sacks, as you mentioned, 16 tackles for loss, led all NFL defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen in sacks, as well as tackles for loss and the quarterback hits. He was phenomenal. I just wish they had a little bit more help, including from a certain first-round selection that, as you mentioned before, we both were fortunate enough to work, on sports radio KJR 93.3 throughout times in this past NFL draft, alongside at times with Mike Holmgren. And look, when the Seahawks made the selection of Byron Murphy II, I was a little bit surprised because, frankly, I thought that there were other defensive tackles that played at least as well as Byron Murphy II did in college. And frankly, Jer'Zhan Newton, who wound up going in the second round to the Washington Commanders, had more starts, had more tackles for loss, had more sacks, had more quarterback hits. Braden Frisk to stay in the same division as the Seahawks for the LA Rams. Again, exact same kind of thing. More starts, more tackles for loss, more sacks. Hell, he went to the Pro Bowl, or had at least some Pro Bowl votes. So again, I wound up giving Byron Murphy II a C. But that is basically the second highest. Oh, I'm sorry. Leonard Williams with an A, Jaron Reed, of course, with a solid B. I think that he continues to play at an exceptional level. But Byron Murphy II, to me, look, he's such a young player. He's such a uniquely built player. There's no question that some of the big plays that Big Cat was able to make is because that Byron Murphy II was kind of eating up some of those blocks at the nose guard position. And obviously, when you start talking about guys like Jer'Zhan Newton and Braden Fisk, as I mentioned before, they played a little bit more on the outside than just at the nose and as that one technique, sometimes three technique as Byron Murphy II played. But still, that was one of the arguments that I had for Seattle considering some different defensive linemen in the first place. So again, to me, this is a B- grade that I feel pretty confident in for the Seahawks defensive tackle, but it felt like this could have been a group that completely excelled. I had even higher hopes and expectations, frankly, for the Seahawks in 2025.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a B+. You and I are on a little different tangent because I'm basing this in the film I've watched. Byron Murphy II, to me, played much better than his stats indicate, especially as a run defender. If you look at the 3 games he missed early in the season with an injury, that's when the run defense really started to unravel. And then they were able to start getting it put back together when Ernest Jones came in, but also having a healthy Byron Murphy II and his ability to eat up blocks and be disruptive at the line of scrimmage. There were a lot of plays that he easily could have made, but he helped teammates create them. And that's what really good interior defenders do. I expect the splash plays are going to come for him. So I'm going to give him a B- because the pass rushing numbers were not where I wanted it to be. I thought his run defense was outstanding most of the season, though. So I'm not going to go to C. I'm going to go B-. I'm giving Jaron Reed a B+. Jaron Reed had 15 quarterback hits this year. Now, he might not have had the sack numbers that we've seen in some of the prior seasons. He had 7 the year before, but he was arguably more disruptive overall getting after quarterbacks this year. With the quarterback hits that he was able to have, he was right on par in pressures. We saw him get his hands on the football a few times in the line of scrimmage. You've talked how much you want guys to do that. Jaron Reed's been one of the few defensive linemen the Seahawks have that has been able to consistently do that. And I thought that Jonathan Hankins, I gave him a C+. His play was a little more uneven than I was hoping for this year. But I think when you add him and Roy Robertson-Harris, another guy who I don't care about his numbers. When I watched the film, he was definitely a positive contributor, particularly with the run defense. To me, this defensive line, maybe it underachieved a little bit because you were hoping for more statistically from a few of these guys, including Byron Murphy II. But for me, I think the way that Big Cat played, the way that Jaron Reed played, how the veterans contributed. This was just a cohesive unit that I really enjoyed watching play. And I'm with you. I do think there is more for them to squeeze out of the tank next year, particularly in the pass rushing department.
Yeah, there has to be. Again, I mean, just imagine a scenario in which Leonard Williams does not have the type of splashy season in which he did. If Jaron Reed, at his age, is your best, most reliable defensive lineman, which, again, could potentially be the situation if Leonard Williams doesn't just go off this past season, then, again, I think we're talking about a whole different story here. And, again, I don't want to, just kind of bash on the rookie. He is an exceptionally young player who's got a very, very bright future. But still, he was basically invisible when it came to the pass rush. And that was one of the things that Mike McDowell kind of said, is that every defensive player has got to provide some pass rush. Corbin, he had one quarterback hit. He had half of a quarterback sack. I mean, that is the antithesis of a guy who is being able to create some type of pressure. So, yes, he was very effective in the running game. There's an awful lot of day 3 selections at nose guard who are effective in the running game. He's got to become a much more well-rounded player, completely versatile type of a player to justify Seattle making him the second defensive player selected in the entire 2024 NFL draft. So I'm very high on him. I thought that the lack of improvement from Mike Morris as well as Cameron Young is one of the other reasons why I dropped this grade a little bit. And again, both of those players played outside when they did play as much as they played inside. But to me, the fact that Seattle had to rely on their old, wily, very, very still talented elder defensive lineman is one of the reasons why I do have some concerns for this group. But again, with all of the upside of Byron Murphy II, as well as the fact that I just expect there to be some improvement in year 2 under Mike McDowell and Adam Dirty, as you mentioned, that's the biggest reason why I'm excited. This could be a positional group that will build up and exceed expectations in 2025.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. And make sure to check out the new site. We've got all Seattle sports all the time, the Emerald City Spectrum, emeraldcityspectrum.com. Make sure to check it out. We launched today. We have 3 articles, 2 Seahawks, 1 Mariners from Locked On Mariners host Ty Gonzalez. Make sure to check that out. When I return tomorrow, I'll be teaming up with Nick Lee, and with the Super Bowl coming up, we're going to dish out our all Super Bowl team for the Seahawks, looking back at their 3 previous appearances in the big game. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Thursday night. Go Hawks.